Hey, check this out.
The Terminator is one of my favorite films of all time. I consider it to be damn near perfect. It's a stunning genre piece, groundbreaking, ingeniously crafted, and still exciting all these years later. As such, it's been difficult to watch every sequel chip a little away from what made the original so great, because, in my increasingly non-humble opinion, the first Terminator is not only the best of the series, but all the subsequent sequels have done little more than to damage the Terminator brand, a brand that never quite received its due in the first place. I assume if you're watching this video, you've seen the film. But here's a refresher on the basic story just in case. The Terminator concerns a dystopian future where the survivors of a nuclear holocaust have found themselves at war with an artificial intelligence. After the machines find themselves on the losing side of this conflict, they send a killing machine that looks human back in time to assassinate the mother of the leader of the resistance. The humans send back a lone soldier to intercept. With both the soldiers landing in 1984, it's a race to see who can stop who.
Sarah Connor?
I have answered your question, now I have to see Sarah Connor!
Science fiction author Harlan Ellison sued the production and distribution companies Hemdale and Orion for plagiarism from his scripts for The Outer Limits.
There is theft constantly, and the horrifying thing about it is that these people do not perceive of themselves as thieves. They think any idea, in fact, Keegan was quoted in the Herald Examiner, the LA Herald Examiner, as saying, I've been in this business 18 years and I've never seen anything original. Everything is a variation on everything else. He really believes that, which is why everything that's on television is a ripoff of something else. BJ and the Bear is a ripoff of Smokey and the Bandit. Battlestar Ponderosa is a ripoff of Star Wars. They're all one steal after another.
The episode in question is Soldier, about two soldiers from almost 2,000 years in the future falling back to 1964 through an accidental time warp. One soldier is stuck between times and the other is quickly captured and kept under government surveillance until a language specialist brings him home in an attempt to acclimate him to contemporary times and learn to understand him. Eventually, the second soldier breaks free from his time imprisonment and the two soldiers from the future duke it out on the living room floor and are melted away by means of future weaponry. Not an exact match, sure, but I do see some similarities in the basic idea of two opposing factions from the future going back through time, and a line in the ending narration comes close to reflecting more of the Terminator.
For answers lie in the future. Is it a future in which men are machines born to kill?
Also, I do find these line deliveries similar.
Name's Qualo Globregni. Fight! RM-EN-DN-DIO.
His name, his rank, and his serial letters.
Way well they settled.
Ultimately, though, I'd say this claim is pretty bunk.
Every copy of the film thereafter, whether on video cassette or laser disc, on cable TV or commercial TV, would say the producers wish to acknowledge the works of Harlan Ellison. And I said to them, if Cameron had come to me before he did The Terminator and said, I really love Soldier, I got another take on it, do you mind if I work that field? I'd have said, with my blessing, kiddo.
But let's wind back and talk about the film's real inception and such. In some ways, James Cameron's The Terminator felt like an inevitability. You can see glimpses of the look and tone in his early short film Xenogenesis, and it was his work here that landed him on the art team and eventually as the art director on the Roger Corman picture Battle Beyond the Stars, a fun but cheap-looking sci-fi version of Seven Samurai or The Magnificent Seven. Battle Beyond the Stars used miniatures, matte paintings, and spacecraft designs that feel almost proto-Terminator in concept if you squint your eyes just right. It also features a performance by Earl Boen, who would go on to play the criminal psychologist Dr. Silverman in The Terminator.
Great stuff. I could make a career out of this guy.
There was a point where the art director was let go from the film a week before productions started. And the film was left without a production designer, and very little had been built at that point.
And as our art department was evolving, as people came and went over the 3 weeks prior to principal photography, those of us that remained in the department, by consensus, pointed to Jim and nominated him as our production designer. We said, well, there's the guy that knows what this film needs to look like. He was obviously beautifully suited for that. He had a vision for the film and he had artistic ability. Plus he was a good leader. So we just said, okay, Jim, you're our boss.
It's his work on Battle Beyond the Stars that firmly establishes Cameron's ability to use effects work as a story function. And you can see shades of Cameron's craft during some shots in Escape from New York.
There was one sequence we had, I think you'll see in the film, where these helicopters are coming over Central Park. They're dropping food for the prisoners. We needed a big matte shot because we shot this in the San Fernando Valley. A New World came down with Jim Cameron as a matte painter, and they did it the old-fashioned way with a glass painting. You put up a piece of glass in front of the camera and you paint on it. And so he was out there in the middle of the daytime painting New York in the background.
He would go on to do production on the awesomely named Galaxy of Terror. The same sort of business here, with hints of the imagery of Cameron's films can be seen. Now, Cameron actually did second unit on this film, and it said he so impressed the producers that when word of a need for the director for the sequel to Piranha went around, his name was quickly brought up. Details are a bit sketchy here, but Cameron was eventually let go. So it's difficult to say what he directed and what was done without him. But there are a couple different versions out there, with one claiming to be Cameron's vision and yet both carrying his name because Piranha 2 was filmed with an Italian crew in Jamaica, and in order to gain North American distribution, they needed an American director's name. So while Piranha 2 is exactly the kind of schlockfest one would expect, it does still carry the virtue of starring future Terminator actor Lance Henriksen and a somewhat familiar POV shot. What all this basically means is that while James Cameron had worked diligently and by all accounts quite competently on other movies, The Terminator was still more or less his debut film as a director. And what a debut it is. Taking inspiration from imagery hallucinated from a fever dream while working on Piranha 2, The Terminator owes more to the slasher films popular at the time than to the low-budget sci-fi films Cameron had been working on up to this point. There's also not an incredibly huge leap from Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees to the Terminator itself, a near-invincible villain with a sharp, murderous focus. Only its predilection for guns seems different, but influences can still be seen from sci-fi films like Blade Runner to the late-era 70s actioners like The Driver. In a film about attempting to prevent a global-scale apocalypse, it's worth noting Cameron films the LA locations as if the city were already on the verge of ruin. The homeless who inhabit the streets and alleyways are visually mirrored in the huddling war refugees seen during the future war flashback sequences. He does a similar thing with the presence of the police and machine technology to play off the humans who will one day populate the apocalyptic hellscape, hiding from the machines. Cameron's use of the film language is masterful even at this early stage. Take the Tech Noir Club shootout sequence. Our protagonist, Sarah Connor, does what so many slasher victims often fail to do, and hides in a public place. But the Terminator only cares about infiltration so long as it comes before it has located its target. Cameron first employs some subtle bits of dark humor, foreshadowing immediate events. 1. When the Terminator finds Sarah's student ID, the audio cue from the next edit starts before the cut, telling both the Terminator and the audience,
"It's her. Sarah Connor?"
2. Traxler reassures her she's in a public space and therefore safe, while the lyrics in the song playing in the club say, 3. The bouncer in the club is wearing a shirt with an exposed ribcage as its design, not so subtly declaring his weakness: brittle human bones. 4. As the Terminator scans the club and floats through the dancers like a shark on the prowl, Sarah accidentally knocks over a bottle, and as she reaches for it, is just barely missed by the Terminator. As with much of the film, the Terminator is shot from a low angle, but it seems the extras they cast were also picked for their height relative to Schwarzenegger's, because he looks absolutely immense in comparison with most of them. All of this is just window dressing. I think it's fun to bring up before we see how Cameron suddenly changes gears here and the movie switches genres. When talking about build-up, it's worth bringing up the names Sergio Leone and Sam Peckinpah for their distinct contributions to the use of suspense before a gunfight. Leone builds steadily, in the moments before the bullets are let loose like the stretching of a rubber band. The music builds, the edits become shorter, and usually, just before that snap of gunfire, it's a second of silence. The action is the snap itself. Peckinpah similarly builds tension, but not in a climactic fashion, but as a slow march to inevitability. Once it gets there, he usually allows for a breathing moment as well, but longer. Then it's a wild disarray. Quick cutting, blending slow motion and regular speed makes for a discordant experience. But that's the purpose. In the Wild Bunch, the film itself reflects the final battle as one of a few scorpions on an anthill. Cameron's style is something of a blend. His building of tension is less about snapping into action than it is unwinding what's been wound. We've seen 2 direct assassinations in the film by this point, and 1 off screen. But both the ones we've seen use a slow motion effect, and that is brought back here, which brings along with it a dreamlike sense of dread. Michael Biehn struggles with the patrons for a line of sight, but can't seem to quite get it. Cameron really stretches out this moment, and the Terminator takes his time to line up his shot as to be absolutely sure of it. The music of the club has faded away completely. Now only a discordant synth noise, like maybe something from The Shining, can be heard. Audio focus is on the clicking of a loaded gun. And then... one of the things that the slow motion did with the slowing down of time is that now when everything suddenly hits and the edits are very fast, everything occurs like in a blur. This is where Cameron employs a bit of breathing room, but it's a psych out. The speed with which things are happening is emphasized here by the spitting of the Terminator's Uzi. In all that time Cameron had used to build to that first gunshot, he was also establishing a tight geography. We see the dancers, the 3 primary players, and their relative distance. When the Terminator begins firing again, it's a scramble to get more space between the active characters. Also worth noting here is that the Terminator does get a shot off, but Reese is just in time to knock its arm off kilter, so Sarah is just barely saved. There's an easy Blade Runner reference as our hero blasts the Terminator through a window, followed by a nice nod to John Carpenter's Halloween. It's after all the gunfire and everything here seems over that James Cameron shoves a little bit of horror back into the movie. Here's where you breathe, and I hope you've caught your breath, because this is just getting started.
Come with me if you want to live.
And so James Cameron attempted to craft an entirely new genre here. Using the sci-fi horror hysteria from the 50s and 60s as a starting point, he infused noir and contemporary slasher film elements and injected the whole thing with a kind of John Carpenter and Walter Hill-esque action quality he and producer Galen Hurd called tech noir.
We called it tech noir because we felt that if we were going to get any good reviews at all, it might be good to spark critics' interest in the kind of filmmaking that we were doing, that it was, as opposed to film noir, tech noir, the dark side of technology.
This is one of the reasons Cameron has always refuted the claims of Harlan Ellison.
They programmed you to think you were a human with a surgically attached computer for a hand. But you are a robot, Trent.
Ellison was very much of his time. Cameron looked to transcend the genre, and I think he does so here, and in doing so helped reignite an interest in action films and created one of the genre's biggest sensations in its star. This seems like a good time to bring up the importance of casting Arnold Schwarzenegger, who, although he has only a fraction of the screen time as his co-stars, looms over the entire production because of the way Cameron wrote and filmed him, and also due to Schwarzenegger's own powerful presence. The role of the Terminator has become so closely identified with the former bodybuilder, it's surprising to know just how close it came to be cast with a completely different actor altogether.
But when I got involved, I remember they told me that it was O.J. Simpson was the Terminator, and I was supposed to play Reese.
The fact of the matter is, the Terminator never would have gotten made if it weren't for the presence of a known Hollywood entity, and it didn't matter much to the studio who that was. Cameron wanted Lance Henriksen, the studio wanted O.J. Simpson. Cameron had already drawn up imagery with Henriksen as the Terminator, though this was easily switched up when Arnold was cast. Henriksen would take a smaller role in the film, and Cameron would finally get to put him in a film in a similar role a couple years later with Aliens.
It's no more, because it was my last year of competition, and I would like to announce officially that I'm retiring from bodybuilding competition.
Schwarzenegger's own entrance to the acting arena was as inevitable as the Terminator itself.
I like acting very much, so maybe I can have a new career there, who knows. You must relax.
Yeah.
You're too tense.
Yeah.
This is your first massage?
Yeah, so please be gentle.
After making a splash playing a bodybuilder in Stay Hungry, Arnold took a few small roles in other films, a slapstick comedy, a made-for-TV movie, before gaining a hold of public consciousness with Conan the Barbarian.
Crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentation of their women.
And although that film was a hit and there was a sequel soon after, it would be with the Terminator that he would become a star.
Do you think with your interest in adventure films that some people are less prone to consider you a serious actor?
I don't care. Because it doesn't mean anything, you know, it's just entertainment.
Arnold has been criticized as a poor actor at times, but he's actually a gifted performer. People forget how important body language is, and Arnold spent years working at just that when he was a professional bodybuilder. If you've ever seen a competition, you know what a pose-off is. Sure, you need to look great and have big muscles, but there's another element to it as well.
You can have the best product in the world, but if you don't know how to sell it, it's a waste of time, the whole thing.
Every bodybuilder has their strong points, and even the best bodybuilder isn't going to be perfect. But you do have to know what you look like in comparison to someone else. If someone next to you looks great flexing in an open bicep, you have to show how much better your chest looks. If someone has a chiseled torso, show off how you can tower over them with excellent muscularity and arms outstretched. In 1974, when Arnold knew he was going to be up against Lou Ferrigno, who was much taller, Arnold gained a massive amount of muscle to make the future Hulk star look thinner and underdeveloped. Years of practicing poses and knowledge of what makes him look a certain way from whichever angle made Arnold perfect for a role where he only has about 20 lines of dialogue and all the rest is how he moves. It's clear Cameron wanted something akin to what Carpenter had done in Halloween, but Arnold also drew from the movement of sharks, surveillance camera, and even other actors.
First of all, you have to understand that Clint Eastwood was like my inspiration. So obviously when you then see your idol coming up with a movie like Dirty Harry and creating a whole new standard in action movies, and also to do it with a certain style, and the way he played it with a certain, characteristics and lines that were memorable lines, I said to myself, that's what I have to do. It just happens to be that not too long ago, I saw the movie WESTWORLD with BRYNNER, who played a machine. And he played the toughest of the toughest. BRYNNER is a fantastic actor. And he played the toughest kind of cowboy.
Your move.
And the shooter. And when he was in the bar and I saw him, the way he acted, but everything was kind of off because it was not like a human being, but he couldn't identify really, there's something wrong here, but he couldn't identify exactly what it was until later on when he saw that at night they took them apart and they fixed the machines and he said, that's what it was. I knew the way his eye movement was, the way his head was kind of a little bit more jerky, and every move was a little off. So I remember all that. And I was fascinated by that because I've never seen that on film.
He has incredible concentration. He takes physical direction like no actor I've ever worked with.
So it's always been interesting to see not only how a lot of people get their base Arnold Schwarzenegger impression from this movie, but how wrong they always are.
I'll be back.
There's a reason almost every other attempt at cyborgs falls flat. In fact, the Terminator is far more expressive than Arnie has ever given credit for. Note the manner in which Arnold moves his eyes, and then his head and body follow, or how almost panicked he can be in combat. There is a kind of anger in his clenched-jawed expressions. That anger appears to have some form of origination at the script level. The Terminator operates on its own internal logic, with continuity being necessary to create believability for the premise. Remember that shot of the gun going off and just barely missing Sarah. This is a wound that the Terminator later repairs, and while the machine does not function because of fear of failure, it does show frustration when it forgets to grab a fully loaded Uzi as it chases after its prey once it gets back up. The costumes, cinematography, and Arnold's physicality go a long way in making the Terminator look especially immense here, but it's Schwarzenegger's expression of retribution that really sells the moment. And perhaps this is a natural carryover from his bodybuilding days. The Terminator has pride and a sort of vanity. Again, there's clearly input from the director here as we see the Terminator fussing with its hair to get it just right, but it's mostly in the former bodybuilder's use of body language. This is one of the reasons the beginning of Terminator Genisys was so wrong. The body language is off. It's not just the dead eyes and goofy, stilted movement. The Terminator is proud of what he is, a powerful killing machine in a world of weakness. Chin up. Entitlement. He's not pushing his forehead out and glaring. He's more BRYNNER from Westworld.
Draw.
And less angry Anakin Skywalker. Arnold spent a lot of time before and during the filming out with the crew practicing with the weapons so it would appear natural on film. And this only furthers a sort of dark power fantasy side to the Terminator.
People want to have that fantasy of being able to do exactly what they wanted to do whenever they wanted to do it.
The nation's #1 box office hit in recent weeks has been The Terminator, a violent action movie starring Arnold Schwarzenegger as an avenging killer from 40 years in the future.
At its release in 1984, a lot of people were unsure of what to think. It left critics divided over its cinematic value.
As an action picture, I thought it was pretty well made.
As an action picture, I thought it was not particularly well made.
But united about its depiction of violence.
Arnold Schwarzenegger in a bloody hand.
It's violent, it's bloody, it's sadistic.
Despite being filled with shooting and explosions, The Terminator is a film that makes its case about guns quite clear. They aren't the answer.
Can you stop it?
I don't know. With these weapons, I don't know.
We see again and again that guns fail to put down the threat of annihilation represented by the film's titular monster. In the hands of the Terminator, they are lethal weapons, killing its targets and causing collateral damage without concern. But the movie also provides commentary on the ease in which the Terminator has access to some of the most dangerous weaponry.
Uzi 9mm?
You know your weapons, buddy. Any one of these is ideal for home defense.
And though there is some squib work to showcase the impact of bullets, and the Terminator literally punches a hole through Brian Thompson at the start of the film, the most gory scenes in the movie mirror self-harm more than the stabbing and slashing usually found in horror films of the time. But sure, The Terminator is a violent film. It's just not nearly as ultra-violent or mean-spirited as Siskel and Ebert would have had you believe. And even Ebert had to admit the movie is damn good.
Because I think I'm going to give thumbs up. In fact, I know I'm going to give thumbs up to this picture.
But I can see James Cameron's concern about people identifying with the Terminator. And it makes sense he would attempt to soften the character for the sequel.
I swear I will not kill anyone.
The thing about the Terminator's violence is that it's all purposeful, like the rest of the movie's details.
What we do is if we need that extra
push over the cliff. You know what we do?
Put it up to 11.
11, exactly.
You understand the threat of the Terminator after seeing what it could do. Without that, you just have a robot throwing people around, which would be lame. The manner of ingenious craft and clever execution almost make the whole endeavor's success inexorable. The concept on its own is wildly ridiculous, but because James Cameron and his team so thoroughly create a believable world, the story ends up working. The Terminator's exoskeleton, a live-action, fully realized rendition of the image from James Cameron's fever dream, is both terrifying and somehow absolutely believable. Through Stan Winston's talented team, the Terminator's true form was built to scale, giving it the right weight and feel of something tangible. When we see it moving, it's being worked by up to 5 people to get the motions correct. And even when the endoskeleton is done in miniature through stop-motion technology, its jerky movements and Jason and the Argonauts-like similarity make for a nightmarish bit of cinematic illusion. Say what you will about stop-motion being an outdated effect, but it looks scary when used right. James Cameron used all manner of projection and miniatures to create varying effects for the film, most of which hold up especially well, even over some of the effects from Terminator 2. Though the one that legitimately surprised me was the oil tanker explosion at the end of the film. The truck they used was built in miniature and it looks great. This is something you simply never see anymore. It's not a pile of animators, but a collection of people with different skill sets uniting behind a singular vision. It's tireless work and practical execution. Often, this would mean really going out of their way to get the scene they wanted. When Cameron wanted to have the Terminator punch through the windshield of a speeding car, but wanted the effect of a real windshield and not something that would just simply shatter, they went for it. But to get the power to pierce a windshield in a single go, they had to use a hydraulic machine. And this created the obstacle of not being able to move during the shot. Instead of using rear screen projection to simulate the car moving, they put a false wall on a semi-trailer and drove it by. All this for a moment that lasts less than a second in the final film. But it works, and it's excellent visual storytelling.
It created the idea of this unstoppable Terminator, and you didn't need to believe initially that there was metal under that body.
Few action films have the same go-for-broke mentality behind them as this. And yet the filmmaking on display manages to remain so incredibly deliberate, starting off with what would soon become Schwarzenegger's signature line,
"I'll be back." Jim, I said to me, "I'll be back." This sounds weak. I say, "I will be back." And he said, "No," he said, "just say, I'll be back." And I said, "But when I say I'll, this, oh, I'll, it's weak. It doesn't sound like a machine." I said, "I would say, I will be back." And he says, "Just say, I'll be back." God damn it, he says, "Don't rewrite my script."
The thing about I'll be back is that it's less a coda than it is a signifier of things to come. It's a promise of future spectacle.
I'll be back. I'll be back. I'll be back. I'll be back. I'll be back.
I'll be back. I'll be back.
See you later.
Come on, aren't you going to say, "I'll be back"?
All right. No. All right. No. No.
Try it.
Old.
It's really old.
And it all began here.
I'll be back.
One thing Schwarzenegger seemed to kind of understand at the time was the line's rather innocuous phrasing. Sure, it could have been, "I'll wait over here," or "I'll come back later," but this is a line for recall and repeat viewings. It's a kind of tongue-in-cheek dark humor, similar to the way you end up more or less rooting for the villains of slasher films. You want to see what this thing can really do. And like the Technor nightclub sequence, Cameron first precedes the action with this humor. Notice how the skeptical but largely clueless criminal psychologist never even gets a look at the Terminator. Then the line.
I'll be back.
An understatement. He's coming back with a vengeance. Cameron gives the titular antagonist frightening momentum, first catching the police unaware, then simply plowing right through everything they throw at it. Every action has a reaction, and we are treated to 3 interesting fake-outs. Number 1, most notably, instead of leaving, the Terminator crashes a car right through the front door of the police station. The club wasn't safe, and neither was this place. Number 2, the screaming gunman. One guy gets several shots off, dead on, and screaming like his life depends on it. This is a trope as old as war films themselves, and the Terminator even stumbles back for a moment. But it's not to be. And number 3, after all this, nothing can stop it. We see the silhouette in the window and feel that dread sink in. But it's Reese. It's a great little moment I wish Cameron would try more often. After the Terminator darkens the station by frying the breakers, James Cameron and cinematographer Adam Greenberg make use of the station's emergency lights and gunfire smoke to really bring out the noir of the film's stated tech-noir genre. This is best used when the Terminator appears from the smoke and the darkness in one shot to open fire on the glass cubicles in the station. An easy mistake for action films to make is the lack of impact from bullets and other projectiles. As I said earlier, the Terminator does not make this mistake. Every bullet seems to hit something, somewhere, and cause damage. A minor detail during the police station shootout is this glass fixture cracking in the background. It's a nice touch, like the drinks and debris during the nightclub shooting, and the holes being punched into the cars during the chase scenes. It's a blink and you'll miss it kind of moment, but you can actually see the impact it takes out the Terminator's eye during that car chase. And that's all part of what makes this film work so well, in its efforts to make the film seem grounded in a tangible reality. For inspiration in this regard, Cameron looked at films like David Cronenberg's The Dead Zone, which put focus on characterization over effects and fantastical styling.
The ice is gonna break!
Blade Runner might have been able to get away with its more science fiction heavy embodiments due to its futuristic setting and noir-inspired design approach, but Cameron was working within a much smaller budget and for a much smaller story, and yet he was able to maintain the spirit of the genres he took inspiration from, while also expanding them in new ways. One small instance is the means of the final destruction of the Terminator. It is crushed and oppressed by a woman in a fashion that is notably similar to the manner in which the titular creature from the sci-fi horror classic The Fly is ultimately destroyed. Noir lighting, body horror, the terror of an indestructible adversary, future anxiety, and explosive, propulsive violence. Every time I watch The Terminator, I am struck by all this rich detail James Cameron and his crew of ardent collaborators were able to squeeze into this relatively inexpensive movie. And when one goes to look at all the work put in, especially in preparation, it's incredible. Not only are Cameron's detail-rich storyboards impressive for how close they are to what he accomplished in the final film, but for the direction and exquisite instruction apparent in them. They detail not just the framing of the image, but how to accomplish some of the in-camera trickery. And I hate to go back and harp on Terminator Genisys again, but it is a truly awful rendition of what worked the first time around, largely because it's so simply lazy. What was the point in getting period-accurate police cars and using some of the same locations if they weren't going to take the time to get the other details right? I mentioned how they got the Terminator wrong here, but it's more than that. I do think the effect of having a young Arnold Schwarzenegger is an impressive feat, and it's cool to see how far the technology has improved since even Terminator Salvation. But look at the punks.
Hey, what's wrong with this picture?
Now I guess it should be a given they weren't also going to do full CGI recreations of Bill Paxton, Brian Thompson and such, but their hair, makeup, and demeanor are all wrong here. And sure, this could just be some sort of ripple effect from it being another timeline, but I think it's indicative of the whole endeavor that they didn't even bother with the 80s punk makeup for these guys. It's like how in Salvation, despite it being made clear time and time again that bullets do absolutely nothing to the armor of the endoskeleton in every film leading up, The movie still opens with a Terminator being killed from a bullet to the head. A regular bullet. And then proceeds to get even the most basic Terminator facts wrong.
You don't want to go out after dark. Hunter killers have infrared.
You stay down by day, but at night you can move around.
Or what about in Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines, when they introduced the idea that a damaged power cell can cause a small thermonuclear blast? Doesn't that make the previous film's sense of dread go away when they could have just ended like this? Or how about how every single movie now has to have a new Terminator? Arnold was the new Terminator.
The 600 series had rubber skin. We spotted them easy, but these are new.
And anyhow, all these other ones are just lazy variations on the T-1000. But I'm nitpicking. The biggest problem with Terminator 3 and Terminator Genisys is they are baldly cynical attempts to recreate the second films in hopes of also recreating its box office receipts. I could give credit to Salvation for at least trying something different, but they just handle it so badly. What about Terminator 2 Judgment Day?
Chill out, dickwad.
Well, it's honestly difficult to really fault the film on its own merits. Not only does it have James Cameron back as the writer and director, it's a bigger, fancier, more colorful version of the first film.
Get it out.
You know, all the same things people give Escape from LA a lot of flack for, but that's a different video. T2 is certainly one of the greatest action films of all time. I'd say its balance of the use of practical effects with CGI is probably the best of the genre. It's got a nice message, the same as the first film, but more adeptly communicated, and some truly great performances. But it's not such a good sequel. A good sequel will expand on the first film, making that movie a richer experience.
Diplomatic community.
Just been revoked.
Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is a good sequel. The Godfather 2 is a good sequel. Terminator 2 acts almost as a replacement for the first film. Aside from recycling imagery and lines, it also attempts to retcon the first film's lore. Now, where was that in the first film?
My father told her this. I mean, I made him memorize it up in the future as a message to her.
Your son gave me a message to give to you. Made me memorize it. Thank you, Sarah, for your courage through the dark years. I can't help you with what you must soon face except to say that the future is not set. You must be stronger than you imagine you can be. You must survive or I will never exist. That's all.
The whole thing goes. The future's not set. There's no fate but what we make for ourselves.
It's nowhere. In fact, it's just one of the few things Cameron dug out of the original concept from back when he was making the first film.
There's no fate but what we make for ourselves.
These are abandoned concepts and ideas being worked into a full-length feature. Not a bad thing on their own, especially because James Cameron retains his eye for detail and exemplary control of the medium, but they do nothing for the original movie. The sequel also loses its amazing synthesizer score, opting for more orchestral grandiosity. It's actually a great bit of movie music, but, and I know this is just my opinion here, I prefer the original sound. It's just so unique. I mean, what else sounds like this? Which brings me back to the point about the sequels actively harming the original. Because of their existence, we have not gotten to experience that first film since its theatrical release. Now, I hate to say this, but you are almost certainly missing out no matter what version of the movie you have. As I just mentioned, the Terminator has one of the all-time great soundtracks, actually recorded live for the film by the great low-tech composer Brad Fiedel. That particular rhythm of the synthesized drums are meant to evoke a kind of heartbeat. and the melody, like a military dirge, has become iconic and synonymous with the series. To get that metal-on-metal feel to represent the character of the film in sound form, he actually dragged metal across a skillet. Listen here as Arnold's name comes up on the screen. Unfortunately, every version of the film you can find replaces the original score, and you miss out on this kind of detail. But it gets worse. In particular, the sound of the gunshots. Hear that? It's all wrong. When the film was released for DVD and all subsequent releases since, the Terminator's audio was somewhat redone. They wanted a bombastic stereo track to showcase the format's pure audio promise, so the original film's monotrack was not only dropped, but its sound effects were completely redone using archived sounds from Terminator 2. The guns were given a stealthy overhaul, what they figured was a more modern sound. And this is kind of too bad though, because in the original mix the guns carried a heavier sound. In particular, the 45 longside the Terminator carries emitted a very specific sound. Fans of the action genre might know the report is famously the same one heard during the fire of Dirty Harry's .44 Magnum. This puts a twist for audiences familiar with the genre. We already would associate the sound with a certain weapon,
The most powerful handgun in the world.
and in fact it does have the effect of making us wince when fired into the victims of the film. But not anymore. This new sound was created with far less attention to detail, and next to no attention to what the sound does for the character of the film. The end result of this is phantom gunshots like this one here, and this one from the police station. Guns that go off and are never heard. Again, this might be construed as nitpicking, but it all adds up to a lesser experience. And to reiterate, there was a purpose in the original film's design at every point. Much of the sound work was designed for that initial visceral experience, but there was also a nice little in-joke in the sound effects later in the film. The sound of the hydraulic press in the factory is the same sound heard during the big robot battle in Cameron's short film Xenogenesis. Fortunately, this remains intact in every release. And all this is just the sound. The movie has also been given a teal sheen on a lightened print. Now that's ultimately up to personal preference, but why not just give us a cleaned up version of the original release? At least what we got is better than the old VHS release. I keep mentioning the detail of the Terminator because it all adds up into the character of the film itself. The movie is so alluring because of all this stuff. It's subtextually rich for these reasons. Having things to say about the availability of guns, personal responsibility, fate, the justice system, technology, masculinity, and female sexuality. I mean, what does the movie say about human interaction when someone who looks like this and acts like this?
Wash day tomorrow. Nothing clean, right?
Nothing clean, right?
Can conceivably walk among us relatively unnoticed. I mentioned the way the movie used the filthy alleys and LA's homeless as imagery meant to parallel and invoke the coming dystopia, but equal to this foreshadowing is the Terminator's insistence in showing how technology can and will fail us. Phones either don't work or betray us, guns can't put down the Terminator, and a set of headphones mask an attack early in the film. A decade before the widespread use of the internet, the Terminator based the apocalypse on networked computer systems.
Hooked into everything. Trusted to run it all.
I almost took this whole section out because I'm honestly not sure how I feel about this just yet, or even if I'm just reading into this all wrong. A lot of credit has been given to James Cameron for his writing of strong women in his films, but his recent comments on Wonder Woman made me think. Just how feminist are these characters? One looks at take-charge badass characters like Ellen Ripley and Sarah Connor, and it's hard to see them as anything but feminist icons. And maybe these are feminist movies. I suppose it depends on whether or not the following statements are mutually exclusive. Aliens and the Terminator are feminist films. All women should be mothers. In the case of Ripley, she was a professional woman. She held a position of power until it was taken away through corporate politics, but is subtly mocked when she takes up a blue-collar job.
I've got to get to work.
All right. I heard you're working in the cargo docks.
That's right.
Running loaders and forklifts, that sort of thing?
So?
Nothing. I think it's great that you're keeping busy.
When she does become the iconic image of the warrior woman, it's in the service of functionally becoming the mother of the recently orphaned Newt.
Get away from her, you bitch!
The movie ends with her almost literally embracing the role of motherhood. The Terminator positions Linda Hamilton's Sarah Connor as a young, independent woman at the height of her sexual powers.
Better than mortal man deserves.
She's a student, has a regular job, and dates men not as a woman who seeks comfort in the confines of a marriage, but for fun and status.
So what if he has a Porsche?
When her date bails on her, she goes out alone for beer and pizza. As I mentioned earlier, the Terminator takes a lot of its inspiration from the slasher subgenre of horror films, which are somewhat infamous for their almost puritanical take on sexuality. Boiled down to their barest essence, if you have sex before marriage, you die. Now, what does the Terminator have to say about premarital intercourse? The characters of Ginger and Matt are both killed winkingly, while an Australian pop song called Intimacy plays in the background. And Sarah Connor, well, she clearly doesn't want to be a mother at all.
I didn't ask for this honor, and I don't want it! Any of it!
But the movie ends, like Aliens, with her finally accepting the role. At first, this may seem unintentional, but this attitude seems to extend to Terminator 2. Sarah Connor has changed the shape of her body, behaves more calculated and dangerously, and even dresses alternatively like the Terminator itself, but also like Kyle Reese from the first film. Ultimately, her character is simply trying to reject the role of the mother, and she breaks down when attempting to become a Terminator-like assassin, and needs rescuing when she tries making a stand on her own.
Shit, she's in the clean room. There's no way out of there.
The film positions her in a bad light when her son wants a mother, but she only views him as the man he is born to become.
I said it was okay.
T2, again, ends with her accepting her role as John Connor's mother. Cameron seems interested in the idea of the mother warrior, and his female characters are written as three-dimensional human beings. The characters themselves are usually strong and well-motivated, but are they ultimately feminist?
You gonna cut her meat for her too there, Cal?
It's hard to say. The Terminator goes out of its way to show how reliant Sarah Connor is on other people, on society, and even her future-born savior. But all these things are stripped away, and Sarah is the only character left at the end of the film. And she is not portrayed as weak or dependent any longer. In a film where time travelers arrive stark naked, it would seem a certain commentary on sexuality is self-apparent. With the Terminator representing a kind of physical ideal, maybe he also represents casual physical interactions, while Reese represents the responsibility and commitment of a real relationship. This would give a whole different meaning to the line,
"Come with me if you want to live."
Because despite all the gore, violence, explosions, and gunfire, the Terminator is a love story.
I came across time for you, Sarah. I love you. I always have.
Reese is from a time where the women are fellow soldiers.
The women in your time, what are they like?
Good fighters.
And it's pretty strongly hinted at that Reese himself is a virgin.
No. Never.
The women of the future aren't mothers. Good fighters, but not mates. Not mothers. And we see what happens to them as soldiers. He comes from a destroyed world, where people eat rats to survive underground. And now, in a decaying society where Sarah's value is ignored, he sees only beauty. This was hammered home more clearly in a deleted scene, but I think Linda Hamilton does a great job in conveying the depth of feelings the two had in one line at the end of the film.
In the few hours that we had together, we loved a lifetime's worth.
The Terminator means a lot of things to a lot of people.
On any promotional tour for any other movie, they said, but we like your movies, but when are you going to do another Terminator?
It was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry for being culturally, historically, and aesthetically important, and I absolutely agree. It launched the career of James Cameron, whose impact on the film industry is nearly impossible to overstate. While computer-generated effects were likely an inevitability, it was Cameron who popularized their use in The Abyss and Terminator 2, paving the way for their integration into more family-friendly blockbusters like Jurassic Park and Independence Day. This is to say nothing about the current trend of superhero films. As I said before, the first Terminator film's violence could be commentary on the ease with which people are able to arm themselves in the United States. In any case, scenes such as the police station shootout would not make it into the sequel.
I swear I will not kill anyone.
And this would be a trend-setting move affecting the action genre in the 90s and beyond.
Say hello to my little friend!
Along with Scarface and Rambo First Blood Part 2, the latter of which James Cameron helped write, and Missing in Action, the Terminator made sure guns were glamorous for a few years in the 80s. So it's fitting they would start the move of taking them off screens, but they would go with a bang. The Terminator helped along the careers of actors like Bill Paxton and Linda Hamilton, though not nearly to the same effect the film had on the stratospheric rise of Arnold Schwarzenegger, who instantly became a household name. Of course, the movie's secret weapon is Michael Biehn. Without his frantic reading of the movie's often incoherent dialogue, the sense of scale, mystery, and momentum simply wouldn't work.
The Terminator's an infiltration unit. Part man, part machine. Underneath, it's a hyperalloy combat chassis.
There was a scene where I was being questioned, and there was a camera in the wall, and basically I was being questioned by the psychiatrist, and I said to Jim, Jim, you know, I think that, like, this guy would be smart enough to know that, like, if this guy's in charge, who's in charge? I mean, who's like, you know, and he would know that somebody was watching him, you know, and then he would look up, and then he would notice and see that camera in the wall. And then instead of that scene was meant to play out with a psychiatrist. And I said, let me just take it and let me go up to that wall, you know. And I think that was very, very effective. And since it was my idea, you know, to take it right to the wall and take it and scream into the wall, I think that's one of my more favorite moments in the movie.
Shut up! You still don't get it, do you? He'll find her. That's what he does! That's all he does!
One of the great tragedies of the next couple decades is that Biehn never became the household name he so clearly deserved to be. He does still appear in movies, and he's even directed his own films, and is always a welcome and dependable presence. But I think he is best remembered for his roles in Cameron's films.
Doesn't mean we're engaged or anything.
The effects artists who worked on The Terminator were looking at movies like The Thing, Blade Runner, and An American Werewolf in London, and wanting to one-up those films and create a classic. Their work paid off, and Stan Winston's career also took off as a result, and he went on to do work on Aliens and create The Predator a few years later. As for me, I grew up just after this film's release. At the time, it wasn't too unheard of for these kinds of films to market toy lines based on R-rated films to children.
Terminator's back to fight evil with this mobile assault vehicle.
I've got to find Evil T-1000.
And I had a few of these toys. But I saw this film, and I traded my Terminator 2 mobile assault vehicle for this movie because I thought this film was about the most amazing thing my young brain had ever seen. I still have that old, worn-out VHS tape I probably watched 100 times. It's probably the single film most directly responsible for my interest in movies in general, because The Terminator remains as uniquely fascinating for me today as it did the first time I saw it. It's still a gripping thriller, a frightening treatise on the dark side of technology, and a tight action film, one of the greatest the genre has ever produced. For a low-budget science fiction action thriller, The Terminator still packs a vicious punch.
Terminator!
Alright, so I know this one was a long one, but if you're still with me, I appreciate you watching. And once again, I do have some fun trivia for my watchers and Patreon subscribers. The song Faithfully by Journey was written by Journey's keyboardist Jonathan Kain about his wife Tawny. Tawny Kain had her own music career, and 3 of her songs are featured in the Terminator with her band The Triangles, most notably Burning in the Third Degree and Photoplay, as heard in the nightclub Tech Noir sequence. The Terminator in the future, with the big laser cannon, is played by Arnold Schwarzenegger's friend and fellow bodybuilder Franco Columbu, who also had a brief cameo in Conan the Barbarian. That's him right there. Lance Henriksen broke his hand doing a jump from a helicopter in Piranha 2, and his injury is briefly referenced in the Terminator.
He was probably on PCP. Broke every bone in his hand, he wouldn't feel it for hours. There was this guy once. You see this scar? Thank you.
That's all. If you guys like what I do, subscribe, like, donate to Patreon. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys.